Welcome to Young PR Pros, the weekly podcast for the young and young at heart PR pros looking for tips and advice on how to build and advance their careers. I am Christine Simpson in Ottawa, Canada, and today I'm doing the show alone, but normally we've got Julia Kent, who sits beside me as my co-host, but she's busy today. We've got Sharon back on the show for the last and final episode of Take uOPRA to Work Day. So before we jump into our interview and introduce this fine gentleman, can you just tell us about what the series is?
Yep, of course. So, as Christine said, today's the last episode for Take uOPRA to Work Day. It is a podcast series that explains different industries within PR, focusing especially on lifestyle entertainment, technology, as you've seen, communication agencies, and today a little bit about government relations. Today we have Nick Rosowski with us, the GM of Fleishman-Hillard.
The Fleishman-Hillard specializes in 5 specific areas related to communications and public relations and that sector of the economy. The first is what you would call traditional public relations, which includes reputation management, crisis communications, awareness raising, stakeholder outreach. You know, the things that are designed to make sure that corporations, individuals, political parties, ideas are put in direct contact with audiences, and put in contact with audiences in a way that's not just one-way communications where I'm force-feeding this information from you, but I'm also trying to learn as much about you and your priorities and your expectations as possible if you're a member of that audience, so that I can adjust my behaviors accordingly. The second thing that we do is focus very much on what's known generally as change management, what I like to think of as innovation communications. It's taking a new concept, a new idea, a new set of values, a new vision, and helping to sell it and gain support for it among an audience that's used to an older vision, an older way of doing things, and that might be a little bit resistant to taking some of those changes. We also have a very large practice in what I would call corporate communications. So really, how do you position a corporation and a corporate entity to be as appealing, as trustworthy, as accessible to its audience, whether it's investors, consumers, etc., etc., etc. The fourth is public affairs. That's an area that we'll talk about a little bit more in detail. But really, public affairs is 4 fields of different activities. Number 1 is, how do I, as a consultant, approach a government or a regulator or a group of governments and regulators to convince them to take actions that might be favorable to a client, or to prevent them or discourage them from taking actions that would be unfavorable to a client. So sometimes it's about getting people to do nothing, which sounds counterintuitive, but it's very important. The second part of public affairs is working with stakeholder organizations, so people who are third parties to government and third parties to the organizations that we represent, and trying to understand where those people reside in terms of their support or opposition to some of the ideas that we're trying to espouse, and based on our knowledge and insight to those audiences, try and engage them in ways that are very constructive. So even if people disagree with us, there's always a way to channel that disagreement into something that's a little bit more constructive than pure opposition of ideas, because you don't want to have open conflict on an issue that affects you or your client or your corporation directly. A lot of research, a lot of opinion research goes into public affairs work. It's really important to understand the psychology, the priorities, the values, the principles of the stakeholders that you're trying to influence, whether that's government as a stakeholder or whether that's those third parties that we're talking about. And then the last part is what I would call direct lobbying. So you have a very specific request that you want to make on behalf of your client. Your client comes to you because they don't know how to make it in a way that will be accepted, and you work with them to make sure that you're doing the advocacy work vis-a-vis the government representatives that you need to influence to get the result that they want. That's probably the most famous part of government relations, but it's probably one of the smallest parts because it's really the sharp end of the stick. And often everybody forgets all of the other work that has to happen before you can get into the position to actually make a direct request. Because really, when you think about it, is not that different from other forms of communications work,
Yeah.
from other forms of persuasion, advocacy, and so on and so forth. It's
Different
the
audience.
government is a different audience. The government is structured very differently from most of the organizations that you would be used to trying to communicate with. So it requires slightly more expert knowledge about the way the government functions to get results for our clients. But the same general principles apply. For anybody who's listening who aspires to a career in communications, what they need to know as they start planning out their career is, I'll give you my own career as an example. I was very fortunate that I was good at each of the things that I did early in my career. I was a very good writer. I was a good analyst. I was a good presenter. I was very calm in the middle of a panic and a crisis. So people would come to me for advice and say, you know, what should you do? And I would be one of the few people for whom things kind of slowed down and got easier and more interesting as things were exploding, as opposed to, oh my God, what do I do? What's next? And for those reasons, and I think I was lucky because I knew early on what I liked to do, and I went and decided I was going to do the things that I liked to do as opposed to do the things that bored me. I didn't want a paycheck. I wanted really a lifestyle, and that's the difference between loving what you do and just a job. And the better you get at those things, the more opportunities you get to be promoted. And then eventually when you get promoted high enough, the things that you're the best at are the things that matter the least to your job. Because all of a sudden you're managing a team of 15 to 20 people, or you're managing a budget of several $1 million, or you've got to restructure an organization to take it from losing money to making money again. And really there's not much about communications that prepares you for that. So you learn by applying the best instincts that you've got in terms of, you know, entrepreneurship, but you also learn a lot by talking to others. There's no formula for that. I think there are 4 or 5 key ingredients, if I can listen that way. The first key ingredient is for the student to know what they want. And I find often that's one of the things that students find the most difficult, is to articulate exactly what they want. But there's no substitute for self-awareness. You should invest the time in really thinking deeply about what motivates you, what makes you happy, what inspires you to learn, where do you get your energy from. That's always a very good clue about what you love. And then the opposite of all those things. What bores me, what sucks my energy dry, what negatively sort of affects my curiosity, and so on and so forth. So that's ingredient number 1, is know yourself and know what you want to do. Ingredient number 2 is related to knowing yourself. It's knowing your values. Because when you're choosing an organization to work for, a big part of that should be values. And the person interviewing you on the other side is selecting you in part based on whether or not you will fit into the culture and into the value system that they're trying to develop. Ingredient number 3 is you have to have a learning plan. What is it that you want to get out of your first job? What is it that you want to get out of your second job, and so on and so forth. And really important to pick and choose according to that particular formula. And then to me, the last key ingredient is what I would call chance. So we all live in markets that are very specific. We've got the good fortune of living in a very globally connected sort of world now, but we still are, to some extent, limited by geography. Unless we've got the courage, which most people don't have, to basically make geography irrelevant and go wherever we want to go. So there's always an element of chance, which is part of the magic ingredient, which is accepting that when you're in a certain marketplace, it makes sense, if you want to succeed, to try and meet a need that is a very obvious one in the marketplace where you are.